Thanks for joining us. We're breaking down the election and finding out what's ahead for Brevard County, and my guest today is Kendall Moore, political consultant, attorney, and longtime civic leader. Kendall, thanks for meeting with us here today.
You got it, Matt. Thank you for having us.
You're always involved in the elections in one way or another. Where were you this year? What were you doing?
You know, we really had a wide variety of involvement this year, Matt, but primarily paying attention to the local elections. You know, there were certainly many important races in the county, many important races in the city, and even many important judicials. So we had quite a bit of time to talk to a variety of candidates and help out anywhere that we could.
Any specific ones that you're happy about that wound up winning?
I mean, certainly you know that we pay very, very close attention to the county commission. Okay. And it was a great transition this year, losing 2 commissioners who had been there for 8 years and transitioning to 2 new ones. It's a very interesting time this year because primarily you had 2 solid Republican candidates that emerged from what were fairly contentious primaries. So the primary season was one that was very, very busy. Both Jim Barfield and Kurt Smith did win with very, very large margins in the general election, but they both came through very, very hard-fought primaries on the county commission side.
We'll come back to the county commission in just a minute, but I know that you've been involved, just for our viewers' sake, you were involved in leading the Charter Review Commission for the county. You were a former Rockledge City Councilman. You've run for State House. I know that you also have some corporate clients that you deal with and help navigate through the system right now. Was there anybody that you were, or any issue that you actually were hired to poll for or do pieces of campaigns for?
You know, I think it's across the board really for our clients that it's important when it comes down to what happens at the county commission. And certainly I'll tell you what we're looking for, Matt, and what we're really pushing hard for are people that I think meet a few criteria. Number one, that you're very knowledgeable or well studied. Some of my clients before the county commission have very complicated issues, and so it takes people that are going to spend the time to study and understand. Second thing to understand is, you know, we just want good government in general, not necessarily being out on an independent ideological battle on your own, but really sitting down and working hard, negotiating with your peers to get to a great resolution that's going to be best for the people of Brevard County. So, you know, we believe when we've got a good product and when we put forward a good service and we go before 5 people that are going to really take the time to study, take the time to think through the issues, debate amongst themselves, and come up with what's best for Brevard, that we'll have a great opportunity.
I just wrote a column to try to make sense of the mandates or any kind of direction the Brevard voters set for people coming out of it. And I looked at the fact that we had Rick Scott plus the Conservation Amendment 1 passing plus school tax plus a couple of fiscally conservative county commissioners. What does that add up to you?
You know, I think it's a lesson for every citizen and every voter. Brevard County is not a monolith. So many times you look at a poll or you think about the information and you try to use these singular words or phrases to describe who we are. And I think it tells you, same kind of precinct that voted for Barack Obama turned around and voted for Rick Scott all throughout the state of Florida, not just Brevard County. On the environmental side, not surprising to me at all. If you go back and look at things, the history of things like eels and others, people have valued environmentally sensitive lands and agreed to tax themselves more in some instances to save them. And then, of course, the AVT legislation coming forward to continue to offer business incentives to allow Brevard County to continually be competitive in this very, very, very strong and competitive market as we compete with counties all around the country to try to bring solid business here.
I forgot to mention that as part of the picture, but those were the property tax breaks that the county and a bunch of different cities offer to companies to help them grow or relocate here. Those have to be reauthorized every 10 years or so, I believe. And
Correct.
So but those passed in a landslide in Brevard County in a year when, in primaries, you heard so much noise about economic development being cronyism and potentially corrupt and all that kind of stuff. What happened?
Well, I think there was 2 parts of the messaging in that particular one that worked. The first one was looking around nationwide, everybody's using them. So if that's a tool that we take out of the toolkit, whether it's from the Economic Development Commission or wherever, we won't be able to compete with other counties around the country trying to get these wonderful companies to come. Second issue, if you think about the projects that have gone by, Project Magellan and Embraer coming to town and the others, there was a clear focus on the number of jobs created and the types of salaries. And I think those were the headlines, even at Florida Today, that people remembered, just those number of jobs created and those kind of salaries. Those are the jobs that we need on the ground, especially with what's transpired with the space program and other things in Central and North Brevard County. Those people knew and understood that that was a tool in the toolbox that we really needed to make things happen in terms of bringing new companies to our community.
Do you think that was the difference maker for Rick Scott in a place like Brevard County? I mean, in Brevard we have, you said it's not monolithic. Republicans, I believe, are 42% of registered voters here. They got the vote out, definitely. It was a midterm. They were 47% of all votes cast. But Rick Scott got 52% of the vote. Now, you know that not every Republican voted for Rick Scott. There was a lot of people who still voted for Charlie Crist. That meant that there was somebody that was breaking for Rick Scott in this county, probably independents. Was it the Giles?
Right. I think you did have, some independents that did break in that direction. I mean, this was a very interesting and unique gubernatorial election. I think I saw today $70 million spent on TV by Rick Scott, $34 million by Charlie Crist. But that level of communication, you and I have had that discussion before. Campaigns are about influencing voter choice. And when you looked at just the sheer amount of communication, during this cycle, you couldn't turn on the TV for 2 minutes without seeing some advertisement. And not only to see that, but to see the number of them that were focused on the negative side of things. And obviously, many may say to us, hey, I don't like them, but obviously they are very, very effective when it comes to influencing a choice of a voter. And so when you look at just the sheer amount of communication, and hey, realistically so, the Rick Scott record on the things that he talked about, jobs and others, were certainly ones that resonated with people here in Brevard.
My wife and I had a nightmare experience last week. We had DVR'd The Blacklist on Monday night.
Right.
And then did what a lot of people do. We were playing it on Thursday night, and we're watching it, and we forgot that we were watching a recorded show. And all of a sudden, all the gubernatorial ads came back on.
Right.
And no, we just thought it was awful to watch. I mean, we thought we were past that at that point.
Well, just the sheer volume, and I saw a passing reference on the news the other day that dollars spent during the last week of this election were almost equal to what was spent nationwide in the last week of the presidential election. So when you start to draw some of those parallels, a tremendous amount of money spent with an attempt, as I said, to influence the voter's choice.
Let's talk about that. That was everywhere this year. I think on just about every level there were, is it called dark money still? I mean, this third-party money coming in. How'd you size up that scene this year?
Well, I mean, certainly you know that from a legal framework perspective, there is an opportunity for third-party organizations outside of the candidates themselves to communicate in races. We not only saw it at the federal level and at the state level, you even saw it in some of the local races during the primary county commission races or others, even in some of the judicials this year. There was some very targeted third-party activity with some very, very strong messages, about the candidates and about the varying campaigns. Certainly it tends to be one where much of the negative news is disseminated through third parties, and many people unfortunately aren't paying attention to the information listed on the bottom of that flyer or of that commercial that says paid for by, and you have that third party organization. But I think we'd be missing the mark if we said that the third party money is not directly impacting races at every single level. But there are businesses and individuals and organizations who feel like they want their voices to be heard relating to how strongly they feel on issues. And you're seeing, tens of thousands, if not in the larger races, millions of dollars being spent for that purpose.
But are they always getting out and communicating their position on issues, or are they doing dirty negative ads just to take out somebody that they think might be counter to their agenda?
I mean, some of them are certainly informative, but I'm going to go back to, and I don't take credit for it, a good political consultant friend of mine says that the intent of communicating is influencing the voter's choice. And you can say this, whether you agree with the tone and the tenor of the ads, they are certainly ones that influence the way a voter thinks or feels about a person or about an issue. I often say to people, it's complicated to understand why a person casts a vote for a certain person or for a certain issue. One thing I can tell you, it may be different than yours or than mine or than a friend of ours, but a variety of people look at varying things out there. And so when you hear people campaigning on these weird issues that you think are completely unrelated to anything associated with that office, there may be some polling data or others that say that's an issue that resonates with a particular voter group, that if I communicate with them on this level and talk about what's important to them, that it may greatly influence the way that they will cast their vote for a person or for an issue.
You know, I heard a great example of that the other day. I believe I was listening to a political consultant talk on, might have been NPR, and they were saying, you look at all these ads that candidates run talking about veterans and their love for veterans and veterans issues. They'll look out for veterans, or veterans have been done wrong. And you think, what? Percentage-wise, there are so few veterans that it couldn't possibly swing an election. But the reason you run veteran ads is not to appeal to the veteran vote. It's to appeal to independents who are patriotic.
Correct.
And see you doing that, and they see you, A, caring, and B, that patriotic sort of strong sort of military background message, even if instead of just aiming at the issues that independents might really be concerned about, education, environment, that kind of stuff.
I mean, there are certain things, if you think about that resonate kind of like ice cream and apple pie. Patriotism is one of them. No matter where you are on the political spectrum, you don't want to be labeled as unpatriotic. And if you can define it as that, someone would err on the side of what you may be asking for not wanting to be patriotic. Same thing. Who doesn't want their community to be safe? So public safety, when you characterize that, who doesn't want their streets to be safe? It's something that everyone wants. And so many times those ads are defined along those parameters. And when they aren't, they certainly change what a voter thinks.
Two gentlemen that have their photos taken with American flags in the background. I don't think that's a coincidence. Also, one county commission races by 2-to-1 margins. Jim Barfield, Kurt Smith. Jim Barfield is to represent Central Brevard.
Correct.
Your territory there, Cocoa, Merritt Island, Rockledge, Cocoa Beach. And Kurt Smith is going to be representing that sort of south central Brevard, Vieira, Suntree, Satellite Beach, that kind of Lake Washington area of Melbourne. What do you make of these two guys? Let's talk about first Jim Barfield.
I would say the one thing that applies to both of them is they are very sharp, savvy business individuals. And I think that brings to the county commission somewhat of a unique focus. You do have Robin Fisher, who has a business background, and so now we're going to 3 individuals on the county commission who are private business people. Jim Barfield running a very, very successful business in town. Kurt Smith, a former owner of a Mako paint franchise. It's one of a local business. But to think about that, I would say to you that we would consider something I somewhat joke with clients sometimes, the 3 colors of black, white, and green. The black print on the white paper and the green dollars. And so sometimes they may bring some of those business principles to the county commission discussion. Certainly having a business-minded thought process and proposition may be one that's going to give somewhat of a different spin or a different steer when we come up to some of the budget-related issues, or a campaign concept you heard a lot about, zero-based budgeting, or people making these claims that they can cut 20 or 30 or 40% from the budget overnight, when maybe some of those business guys know that a feat of that magnitude with the size, scope, scale, complexity of the county commission budget is probably not likely to do it as simply as it is described in the campaign. But certainly they are the kind of people that manage people, that pay payrolls, and that understand, efficiency and effectiveness when it comes to things like cost and those natures. So I think they will be certainly great additions to the county commission.
So you foresee these 2 Republicans, one who was elected as a very conservative leader in Kurt Smith, one who's a fiscal conservative but also is more of a community-minded guy in Jim Barfield, making sort of the business majority on the commission with Robin Fisher, who's a Democrat but is also a successful investor, insurance
right.
brokerage owner, that kind of thing, as opposed to it just being more Republicans, more conservatives?
Well, I mean, I think certainly their political ideology will factor into that. I mean, you had one Democrat on the county commission previously, and you still, you know what I mean, remain with one Democrat. And certainly there may be some issues where the group of the two new county commissioners does swing a bit to the right from a conservative standpoint and vantage point. I think that would certainly be the case. But what I like about them is that they seem to be very clear, nuts and bolts kind of guys that really take a look, investigate hard, take a clear look at what's out there, and can make those hard decisions that are going to be necessary at the county commission in the coming years.
Let's talk about the school board.
Yes.
Tax passed. Surprise?
You know, I was not. I think that there was a big difference, and you and I talked about it the last time that it was going around, and I said to the superintendent and to many of the others.
You were expressing some urgency that they needed to get out there and campaign and do it in a very shrewd, nuts and bolts way and not wait. Yep. Get out there and do it.
Absolutely. And this time I think that they did it. But more particularly, and I congratulated them personally, where I think that they really made the difference is on two words: trust and transparency. It wasn't necessarily about what school you'll close or what program might be cut or whatever. The real anti-people that were getting traction were the ones that were saying they overspent in the past. You can't trust them with new money. You can't trust them with what happened before. Or transparency. They're hiding something about where those dollars went that were, you know what I mean, allocated to them in past years. And they came forward in a very clear and concise way, both internally from the school board perspective and externally. The Save Our Schools organization, Adrian Lafitte and those guys really communicated and campaigned hard on this issue. I mean, kids, that's a very unique one of those things like patriotism and others. Kids and animals are things that people have very strong, passionate feelings about. But what they did, trust and transparency. They let you know through their campaign, you can trust us to do the right thing. We did the right thing before, we'll do it again for the best interest of the kids in an efficient and effective way. And then transparency. Here it is, here are the details. Most people in the community probably saw, if not the entire thing, one of those Brian Bingley presentations where he went on in very significant detail, laying out exactly where they had spent in the past, dollars coming in, where they were going to be spent in the future, and then the introduction of this oversight committee with the potential of some very solid, well-known household names that had been floated out there for potential. So trust and transparency, I think, were the two things, in addition to hard work, of course, that pushed them over the top, and certainly congratulations go to them. I'm a Brevard County public school parent and a Brevard County public school product, and so was very happy to see success for them on Election Day.
It almost seemed like they anticipated that trust was going to be the issue, and they almost made it so that there were enough safeguards in there that even if you didn't trust them, you knew there was going to be this oversight committee, you knew there was an expiration date, you knew that the money couldn't go to new debt, you knew that it had to go to this list that was vetted and published and verified with engineering inspections and that kind of thing.
Right.
It almost took out of the equation this idea, well, the school board, I don't know about that person, and I don't know if I can trust them or what happened in the past. It was more about, here's a real crisis, here's our plan for dealing with it. And you could still have a little bit of a twinge of not liking politicians,
right,
and still get behind this thing that you thought would solve a problem.
Well, they started at personal trust, and that's the one that you talked about. Can I trust that person or that group of people? But they built on that. They said, well, you know what? There's always the professional trust. Let's look at the people that are involved and the kind of training and expertise that they have that we're going to come forward. And then the last one you said, they brought the procedural trust to the table. Here are the rules of the road. Here are the definitions, how long it will last, what we can spend it on. Very specific projects. So on a personal level, on a professional level, and on a procedural level, they communicated that trust very, very effectively, and I think it paid off for them when people went to the polls. Well,
Florida Today has made a very public pronouncement of wanting to get serious about its watchdog mission, and I promise that we're going to keep our eye on that money, and we'll be there with that oversight board to make sure that everything is going the way that it was said that it would go. There was an announcement just in the last day or two that Andy Anderson, one of the longtime Republican county commissioners, is going to be running for the State House. I guess in a couple of years, right? When John Tobias is termed out, I believe. What do you make of that?
Well, I think that we will see, most specifically on the south end of the county, quite a bit of movement as we work our way towards 2016. You will have 3 county commissioners terming out, Robin Fisher to the north, but more particularly to your question, Trudy Infantini and Andy Anderson to the south. You also have a state house member and John Tobiah potentially terming out. You have farther down the road state senate seats coming. You have the potential for movement between the school board, the county commission, city council chambers, people potentially moving back and forth. And I think Commissioner Anderson made the decision that he was going to beat everyone to the punch to let his intentions be known. In addition to county commission and state house, you also have the same thing with the charter offices. And so many of those things will all be coming out and playing around the same time in 2016. I think he made a decision. Maybe he gets a piece of the press time all his own. He gets a chance to take a look at the fundraising before everyone else gets out there and get an early start.
You mentioned the constitutional officers. What I mean, you meant locally offices like, I'm trying to think.
Like your tax collector, sheriff, property appraiser, sheriff. All of those particular positions. Again, although very competent in that regard, of the people that sit there today, if one of them was to decide not to run again, then you certainly may have people who currently sit on a city council, currently sit on the county commission, or may even be currently in the state house that have a desire to seek those positions as well. And so I think we always pay attention to the movement that could be going up, down, lateral, both ways. It's all the way around that we may see movement amongst current elected officials as well as new people coming into the process running for those offices. Now,
you were the head of the Charter Review Commission.
Yes.
Do our officers have a term limit?
Yeah, well, they do not when it comes to your constitutionals. I mean, as you know, we've had long time
I'm thinking
clerks.
Wayne Ivey would probably want to be sheriff
long
forever.
time, sheriff in that regard. But if one of them was to make the decision to step away. But you do have the term limits like in the county commission setting and scenario. So regardless of what transpires in 2016 in South County, Districts 3 and Districts 5, which put heavily into play, the cities of Melbourne and the cities of Palm Bay, as well as the other areas that are included in those districts, will certainly be a big, big factor when it comes to 2016.
Are there any Democrats on those lower rungs that, let's say Robin Fisher is term limited out, or any one of these offices? Are there people in the wings coming up that that stand a chance, or do they all just register as Republicans now, the Blue Dogs and the Clinton types, and just run as Republicans?
I mean, there certainly are Democrats out there that are very sharp, very well qualified, capable. Certainly, all of the districts, as we look around our county, are not equal. If you go back to, I also chaired the redistricting commission, as you are aware, and so the Republican.
That's right.
That's correct. Right. The Republican-Democrat split and mix is very different in some districts than it is in others, and so when you look at a District 4, those numbers are very different comparing it to the districts down south of 3 and 5. When you look at the demographics of some of your southern cities, whether it be Republicans and Democrats or whether it be minorities or others, they are very, very different in that regard. And so what I think you'll have to watch in the coming years will be the changing demographics of Brevard County, looking at the census numbers, looking at the registration numbers, looking at the breakdown on a party level. And I know personally there are some very sharp Democrats out there that have been around, and you actually may see them surface in the coming years. Clearly, though, to win, this is still Brevard County. It requires you to run a very well-run race based on solid data and information of a capability to win, and certainly the ability to outwork your opponent and to raise the dollars that are necessary to effectively communicate. We were talking about communication a bit earlier. All the TV, all the radio, all the mail, all the things that candidates were using to communicate with you are certainly ones that anyone, Republican, Democrat, independent, non-party, must have in order to effectively communicate to a voter. So I think a future Democrat that puts those things together certainly has a chance in Brevard County.
Let's come back to that in a minute. Did I get something wrong here? Did you chair the Charter Review Commission?
Yes, correct. I did choose Charter Review as well as the redistricting.
Poor man, you poor guy. That is dedication. Okay, we got about 2 minutes left.
Okay.
What is when we talk about ground game to go out and win? So let's say one of these Democrats says, you know, I think I maybe have what it takes, or maybe some other Republican. We know there's 2 years until the next major election. What kind of ground game things have to happen? I mean, is it just put on your shoes, get a list, and go knock on doors? What's up?
You know, effectively, when the campaigns that we assist and provide information and documentation to, we can suffice it to say on 2 things: doors and dollars. Dollars, you certainly have to get out to raise the money to communicate effectively, but other than that, we call it doors. I think if there's a candidate who's going to convince Matt Reed to vote for them, knocking on your door, eye to eye, face to face, you know, and looking you and saying, hey, here are the things that I believe in and here's why you should vote for me, is still by far the most effective way to influence a voter's choice out there. So getting out and knocking on doors early. You can't knock on thousands of doors every single day. It takes time to cover an entire district, to go door to door, to pick up the phone and say you're going to make a commitment to make several hundred calls a day. Don't get me wrong. We use electronic calls as well. But to say, hello, Matt Reed, this is Kendall Moore, and I'm calling you personally today to ask you for your vote. That's the ground game I think that's necessary. It works around the state, it works around the country, but most specifically it works well right here in Brevard County.
Well, I don't know how everyone in my household voted, but Kurt Smith in District 4 was very nice to my dog when he came to the front door, and that goes a long way in the Reed household.
Absolutely.
Kendall, thank you for joining us here today.
You got it. Thank you for having us.
And I want to thank you for joining us. We'll see you right here next Wednesday on WEFS and FloridaToday.com.